The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of rapid deceleration. Inside the cramped prisoner compartment, Marcus Chun pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as the massive prison station came into view. The structure hung in the void like a metallic cancer, its dark surface bristling with weapons and sensor arrays that could track a flea across 3-star systems. "Welcome to Tartarus Station," the guard's voice crackled through the intercom, dripping with malicious satisfaction. "Population, everyone the galaxy wants to forget." Marcus pulled back from the window, his chains rattling softly in the artificial gravity. Around him, dozens of alien prisoners sat in similar restraints, their various species creating a bizarre menagerie of scales, fur, tentacles, and stranger anatomies. Most avoided looking at him directly. Humans had a reputation in this part of the galaxy. Though Marcus wasn't sure if it was deserved, the docking process took another hour, filled with the mechanical grinding of extending walkways and the hiss of atmospheric processors. When the guards finally opened the prisoner bay, they moved with the efficiency of a well-practiced routine. Each prisoner was processed through a scanner that mapped their biology, cataloged their species' typical weaknesses, and assigned them to appropriate containment. When Marcus's turn came, the scanner hummed for much longer than it had for anyone else. The Zephyrian guard operating it frowned, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he studied the readout. "This can't be right," the guard muttered, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species. "Scanner shows this one as a baseline human, but the threat assessment is glitched, shows maximum security required." "Impossible," replied his partner, a hulking Kovan whose rocky hide made him look like a walking boulder. "Humans are weak." "Fragile? Their only advantage is that they breed like insects and die trying to prove points that don't matter?" Marcus said nothing. Experience had taught him that speaking up only made things worse, and he was already in enough trouble. The charges against him were fabricated, of course, but trying to explain that to a galaxy-spanning confederation that saw humans as primitive upstarts had proven futile. Someone needed a scapegoat for the destruction of 3 mining colonies, and a human mercenary with a reputation for impossible jobs had been the perfect choice. The Zephyrian guard ran the scan again with the same result. "System keeps flagging him as high risk. Something about psychological profile and adaptive capabilities." He shrugged, his wings rustling beneath his uniform. "Fine. If the computer wants him in max security it is." They marched Marcus through corridors that grew progressively more oppressive as they descended into the station's core. The first levels housed nonviolent offenders and political prisoners in cells that, while Spartan, at least had windows and recreational areas. The middle levels contained violent criminals in smaller, more secure cells with basic amenities. The maximum security level was different entirely. Here, the corridors were wider to accommodate heavy security mechs, but somehow felt more claustrophobic due to the complete absence of windows or decorative elements. Everything was gunmetal gray and harsh fluorescent lighting. The air recyclers hummed with an ominous undertone that suggested they were working harder than designed, fighting against something they weren't quite equipped to handle. "Your new home," the Corvan guard announced with satisfaction as they stopped. Before a massive blast door marked with warning symbols in 17 different languages. "Cell Block Omega, reserved for the galaxy's most dangerous individuals. The ones too valuable to execute but too dangerous to house with the general population." Marcus read some of the warnings as the guards input their access codes. "Extreme hazard. Authorized personnel only, lethal force approved." The last symbol showed a stylized representation of various alien species running away from something unclear, with the universal notation for final warning beneath. The blast door opened with a grinding shriek that spoke of mechanisms rarely used and poorly maintained. Beyond lay a circular chamber with 8 cells arranged around a central guard station that was currently empty and looked like it had been abandoned in haste. Each cell was fronted with energy barriers that hummed at different frequencies, creating an otherworldly harmony that set Marcus's teeth on edge. 7 of the cells were occupied. As they walked around the central hub, Marcus caught glimpses of the other inhabitants of Block Omega in one cell, something that looked like a sentient storm cloud pressed against its barrier, occasionally sending out tendrils of lightning that earthed harmlessly against the containment field. Another held a massive insectoid creature that seemed to be made entirely of living metal, its compound eyes tracking their movement with predatory intelligence. But it was the occupant of the 8th cell that made Marcus stop in his tracks despite the guard's prodding. The creature was enormous, easily 4 times Marcus's height even while lying down. Its body was reptilian but built along lines that suggested both incredible power and unexpected grace. Scales that shifted color in the artificial light covered hide that looked thick enough to stop starship hull cutters. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that had gouged deep scratches in the supposedly indestructible cell walls. Wings, currently folded against its back, showed a span that would have been impressive even in the vast chamber. The head was distinctly draconic, with an elongated snout filled with teeth that belonged on a ship's cutting laser rather than any biological creature. Intelligence burned in eyes that held depths of experience and something that might have been amusement. But what struck Marcus most was not the creature's size or obvious power. It was the air of dignity it maintained despite its imprisonment. Unlike the other inmates who seemed driven by rage, madness, or simple predatory instinct, this being possessed a regal bearing that suggested captivity was merely a temporary inconvenience. The Drakari Primarch, the Zephyrian guard explained, noticing Marcus's attention, last survivor of his species, destroyed 6 battle fleets before they managed to capture him using some kind of psionic dampening field. He's been here for 3 standard years, and the previous 7 guards assigned to this block have all requested transfers. The last one just ran screaming from the station after his shift ended. "What's it done to them?" Marcus asked, speaking for the first time since his arrival. "Nothing physical," the Corvan rumbled. "Thing just looks at them, watches, studies, makes them feel like specimens under a microscope. Psychological warfare, Command thinks. Testing their mental defenses, looking for weaknesses." The guard stopped before the empty cell next to the dragons. The energy barrier flickered and died as they input the release codes. "Home sweet home," the Zephyrian announced cheerfully. "Hope you like the neighbor." Management figured a primitive human might last longer than the trained guards. At least until the psychological pressure breaks you and we have to scrape what's left of your mind off the cell walls. They shoved Marcus into the cell, and the barrier immediately snapped back to life. The guards retreated quickly, their footsteps echoing as they made their way back to levels. That didn't require hazard pay and psychological counseling. Marcus found himself alone with 7 of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, in a cell that measured roughly 10 feet by 12 feet. With basic sanitation facilities and a sleeping platform that had clearly been designed for species much larger than humans. The only furniture was a food dispenser and a small shelf that held a few items the previous occupant had left behind. He sat on the sleeping platform and took stock of his situation. Falsely convicted of mass murder, imprisoned on a station that existed outside normal legal jurisdiction, and locked in a cell next to a dragon that had apparently driven trained prison guards to nervous breakdowns through nothing more than persistent observation. It could have been worse, he supposed. They could have put him in with the living storm cloud. A sound from the next cell made him look up. The dragon had moved, lifting its great head to study the new arrival, those ancient eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was immediately uncomfortable. The creature said nothing, but Marcus felt the weight of its attention like a physical pressure. Minutes passed in silence. The dragon continued to watch, occasionally shifting position to get a better angle of observation. Marcus tried to ignore the scrutiny, but found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on anything else. Every time he glanced over, those eyes were still there, still studying, still measuring dot after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Marcus gave up trying to ignore his cellmate. "So," he said, addressing the dragon directly, "I guess we're neighbors." The reaction was immediate and startling. The dragon's eyes widened slightly, and its head tilted in what was unmistakably surprise. For a moment, the predatory intensity was replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. "You speak to me," the dragon said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's chest cavity. The words were perfectly clear, though spoken in no language Marcus recognized. Yet somehow he understood perfectly. "Should I not?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, we're both stuck here. Seems rude not to introduce myself. Marcus Chun, formerly of Earth, currently?" Marcus woke to the sound of something scraping against metal. The artificial dawn cycle was just beginning, casting the cell block in a pale blue glow that made everything look cold and sterile. He sat up quickly, immediately alert from years of living in places where sleeping, too, deeply could be fatal. The scraping sound was coming from Vorthak's cell. The dragon was using one of his claws to work at something in the corner where the energy barrier met the cell wall. The motion was precise and deliberate, like a craftsman working on a delicate project. "Good morning," Marcus called softly, not wanting to startle his neighbor. "Good morning." "Marcus of Earth," Vorthak replied without looking up from his work. "I trust you slept well?" "Better than I expected. What are you working on?" The dragon paused and turned toward Marcus, holding up something small and metallic. "The previous occupant of your cell left behind several items. Among them was this communication device, which I've been observing for some time." Marcus looked at the shelf where his predecessor had left a few personal belongings. He hadn't paid much attention to them the night before, but now he could see what appeared to be a small handheld device about the size of his palm. "Is it functional?" "Partially. The power cell is depleted and the primary transmitter is damaged, but the receiver array remains intact. More importantly, it contains a data storage unit that has not been completely wiped." Marcus moved to examine the device more closely. It looked like standard civilian communication equipment, the kind used on 1,000 different worlds for basic messaging and data transfer. "What kind of data?" "That is what I am attempting to determine. The storage medium is encrypted, but the encryption appears to be commercial grade rather than military. Given sufficient time and the proper tools, it should be possible to access." "And you're making tools by scratching metal with your claws?" Vorthak held up what he had been working on. It was a thin sliver of metal, one end sharpened to an almost microscopic point. The cell walls contain trace amounts of rare elements that, when properly extracted and shaped, can serve as primitive circuit interfaces. "It is slow work, but I have time." Marcus was impressed despite himself. "How long will it take?" "Several days, assuming I am not interrupted. The question is whether the information contained within this device justifies the effort. What do you think it contains?" The dragon considered this carefully. "The previous occupant of your cell was a Centauri merchant named Kelvak. According to the records I was able to access, he was convicted of illegal weapons trafficking. However, his psychological profile suggested someone who was more concerned with survival than profit. Such individuals often maintain detailed records of their transactions as insurance against betrayal." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You think he might have kept evidence of who he was really working for?" "It is possible. If so, that information might explain why he was eliminated before he could testify at his own trial." "Eliminated?" Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the artificial atmosphere. "Kelvik died 3 weeks ago of what was officially termed cardiac failure due to stress. However, I observed his final hours. His symptoms were consistent with neural poison, specifically a compound that mimics natural death, while leaving no detectable traces after 6 hours. The implications hit Marcus immediately. Someone wanted him dead before he could talk. And now they've put me in his cell. Indeed. Which raises the question of what you know that someone considers dangerous enough to warrant such extreme measures. Marcus sat on his sleeping platform, thinking through the events that had led to his arrest. The mining colonies that were destroyed, I was hired to provide security consultation for the orbital platforms. My job was to identify potential weak points in their defensive arrays. By whom were you hired? A subsidiary of Hegemony Mining Consortium. They said they were concerned about pirate attacks, wanted to upgrade their security protocols. Marcus paused as pieces began clicking together. but the colonies weren't attacked from outside. The destruction came from internal sabotage. Someone with detailed knowledge of the security systems. Vorthak's eyes glowed with interest. And your security assessment would have provided exactly such detailed knowledge. Son of a... Marcus caught himself and took a deep breath. I identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their systems. Any one of them could have been exploited to cause catastrophic damage. I submitted my report 3 days before the first colony was destroyed. I begin to understand why you were chosen as a scapegoat, Vorthak said grimly. You provided the blueprint for the very attacks you were later accused of carrying out. But I never shared that information with anyone outside the company. The report was encrypted and sent directly to my contact at Hegemony. Who was your contact? Marcus tried to remember the details of what had seemed like a routine consulting job. Administrator Yuki Tanaka. Human, supposedly born on one of the Outer Rim colonies. She handled all the logistics, payment, security clearances. Vorthak was quiet for a moment, working with his makeshift tools. Human, he repeated thoughtfully. How many humans hold administrative positions within galactic corporations? Not many. We're usually considered too unpredictable for management roles in interspecies organizations. The realization struck Marcus like a physical blow. Unless they specifically needed someone who could interact with a human consultant without raising suspicions, a conspiracy that required both the expertise of a human security specialist and a human administrator to manage that specialist, Vorthak mused. Someone went to considerable effort to ensure human involvement at every level. Why would anyone want to frame humans specifically? We're not exactly a major power in galactic politics. The dragon set down his tools and moved closer to the energy barrier. Perhaps that is precisely the point. Your species is dismissed as primitive and aggressive. When terrible things happen and humans are blamed, the rest of the galaxy nods knowingly and moves on. No one investigates further. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle shifting in his mind. The perfect scapegoat species. Violent enough to be believable, but weak enough to be safely ignored. Yet there is something the rest of the galaxy does not understand about humans, Vorthak said quietly. Something that makes you more dangerous than they realize. What do you mean? Before the dragon could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Both Marcus and Vorthak moved away from the barriers as 3 figures entered the cell block. 2 were guards Marcus recognized from the previous day, but the third was someone new. She was human, dressed in the administrative uniform of the Galactic Prison Authority. Her hair was black, cut in a practical style that suggested someone more concerned with function than appearance. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Prisoner Chun, she said, stopping in front of Marcus's cell. I am Administrator Sarah Cross. I need to ask you some questions. Marcus studied her carefully. Something about her manner seemed familiar, though he was certain they had never met. Questions about what? Your association with the Hegemony Mining Consortium. Specifically, your relationship with Administrator Tanaka. I told everything I know to the tribunal. It's all in the official record. Cross smiled, and Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The expression was perfectly professional, but there was something underneath it that reminded him of a predator showing its teeth. The official record is incomplete, she said smoothly. There are details about your security assessment that require clarification. Gaps in your testimony that need to be filled. I'm sure there are, Marcus replied carefully. But I'm no longer obligated to cooperate with investigations. Double jeopardy laws prevent... Oh, Mr. Chun. Cross interrupted with a laugh that held no warmth. You seem to be under the impression that normal legal protections apply here. Tartarus Station exists specifically to house individuals who have moved beyond the reach of conventional justice. Here, we operate under special protocols that allow for extensive interrogation procedures. From the next cell, Vorthak spoke for the first time since the guards had arrived. Interesting. I was not aware that the Galactic Prison Authority had authorization to conduct interrogations of previously convicted prisoners. Cross turned toward the dragon, and her professional mask slipped for just a moment. Marcus saw something in her expression that looked like fear, quickly suppressed. "The dragon is not part of this discussion," she said firmly. "Actually," Vorthak continued in a conversational tone, "I believe I am. You see, I've been monitoring the communications networks of this station for some time. Fascinating what one can learn from electromagnetic leakage when properly interpreted." Cross had gone very still. "Communications monitoring by prisoners is strictly forbidden." "Indeed, which is why I have been careful to conduct my observations passively, rather like reading a newspaper that someone else has left behind." The dragon's voice carried a note of amusement. "For instance, I learned that Administrator Cross has made 17 unscheduled visits to this station over the past 2 months. Despite having no official jurisdiction over maximum security operations, how could you possibly know that?" "Simple. Each time a shuttle docks with the station, the gravitational sensors register." The station shuddered as emergency systems engaged throughout its structure. Red lights pulsed in the corridor, and the normal hum of life support systems took on an urgent, discordant note. Through the energy barriers of their cells, Marcus and Vorthak watched the guards struggling to establish communication with Central Command. "Sir, we're getting no response from any station," one of the Zephyrian guards reported, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in distress. "Communication array, security control, even the automated systems aren't acknowledging our signals." The Corvan guard's rocky features were set in a grim expression. "Then we follow lockdown protocols. All prisoners remain secured until—" His words were cut off as the lights went out. Emergency illumination kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie green glow. But in those few seconds of darkness, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold, the distinctive whine of energy barriers powering down. "Impossible," the Zephyrian guard breathed, staring at his control panel. "The barrier systems have independent power sources. They can't be affected by communication failures. Unless," Vorthak said thoughtfully, "someone with detailed knowledge of the station's systems specifically designed them to be vulnerable to the right kind of interference." Marcus understood immediately. "Kelvik, the merchant who was in my cell before me. He wasn't just trafficking weapons, he was providing technical specifications for prison systems to someone who needed them." In the adjacent cells, the other maximum security prisoners were beginning to react to their newfound freedom. The living storm cloud expanded rapidly, tendrils of electricity reaching toward the deactivated barrier frame. The metallic insectoid creature tested the air with cautious movements, as if unable to believe its containment was really gone. "We need to move," Marcus said, stepping out of his cell, "before they get backup power to the barriers." Vorthak emerged from his own cell with fluid grace that belied his massive size. Standing in the corridor, he seemed even larger than he had in confinement, his presence filling the space with an aura of barely contained power. "The other prisoners," the Corvan guard said, raising his weapon. "They're escaping." "No," Vorthak corrected gently, "we are leaving." "There is a significant difference." Before the guard could respond, the dragon moved. It happened so fast that Marcus almost missed it. At one moment Vorthak was standing normally. The next his wing had swept out in a horizontal arc that sent both guards flying into the far wall. They hit with enough force to crack the supposedly indestructible composite material and slumped unconscious to the floor. "Impressive," Marcus said. "But won't that bring more guards running?" "I suspect not," Vorthak replied, moving toward the abandoned guard station. "Observe." The dragon's claws moved across the control interfaces with surprising delicacy, and displays began lighting up across the console. Security feeds from throughout the station showed chaos spreading rapidly. Guards were running through corridors, but they seemed disorganized, confused, responding to threats that kept changing faster than they could adapt. "What's happening?" Marcus asked, watching scenes of barely controlled panic unfold on the monitors. "Our transmission included more than just Administrator Tanaka's confession," Vorthak explained. "I took the liberty of broadcasting a complete schematic of the station's security systems, along with detailed vulnerability assessments and override codes. Every news network that received the information is now sharing it with anyone who wishes to review it. Marcus stared at the displays in amazement. You gave the entire galaxy the keys to break into this place? Among other things, yes. It seemed appropriate that a facility designed to operate outside normal legal jurisdiction should find itself, equally outside normal security protections. On the monitors, Marcus could see inmates throughout the station emerging from their cells. But rather than the chaotic riot he expected, most seemed to be moving with purpose towards specific objectives. Some were heading for the communication centers, others toward the administrative levels where prisoner records were kept. They know exactly where to go, Marcus realized. You didn't just break them out, you gave them intelligence. Information wants to be free, Vorthak said with what might have been satisfaction. These individuals were in prison not just for their crimes, but for what they knew, what they had discovered, what they represented. Now they can share their knowledge with the galaxy. An explosion echoed through the station and new alarms began sounding. On the security feeds, Marcus could see external ships approaching, not reinforcements for the prison, but vessels flying the colors of various news organizations and independent investigation groups. The cavalry arrives, Marcus observed. Think any of them are friendly? Unknown. But I suspect Administrator Tanaka has more immediate concerns than our escape. As if summoned by his words, Tanaka's voice echoed through the station's communication system. Her professional composure had completely evaporated, replaced by barely controlled panic. This is Administrator Cross calling any available security forces. We have a complete containment breach. Repeat, all maximum security prisoners have escaped confinement. Request immediate evacuation for essential personnel. Essential personnel, Marcus repeated. Like herself. Indeed. Though I suspect evacuation may prove more challenging than she anticipates. Vorthak manipulated the security controls and a new set of displays showed the station's hangar bays. Several small craft were attempting to launch, but their departure was being blocked by the ships that had arrived from outside. The external vessels weren't attacking, but they were maintaining positions that effectively prevented anyone from leaving. They want to make sure the truth gets out, Marcus said. All of it. Yes, but there is still the matter of reaching them safely. This station contains numerous individuals who would prefer that certain truths remain buried. As if to emphasize his point, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. These were different from the panicked running they had heard earlier, measured, disciplined, purposeful, military. I believe we are about to receive visitors, Vorthak said calmly. A squad of armored figures rounded the corner, moving in perfect tactical formation. Their equipment was clearly military grade, far superior to anything the regular guards carried. The leader raised his weapon and spoke in a voice distorted by his armor's communication system. Prisoner Chun, prisoner designation Vorthak. You will return to your cells immediately, or we will use lethal force. Marcus looked at the heavily armed soldiers, then at his dragon companion. Any suggestions? Several, Vorthak replied. But first, a question for our visitors. The dragon addressed the soldiers directly. By what authority do you operate on this station? Special Security Directive 749, the leader responded. Authorization level Omega Black. Interesting, Vorthak mused. I'm not familiar with that particular directive. Marcus of Earth, does your species' military doctrine include provisions for executing prisoners without trial? Marcus caught on immediately. Not officially. In fact, summary execution of prisoners is specifically prohibited under both human military law and galactic conventions. Then these individuals are operating outside legal authority, Vorthak concluded, which makes them criminals rather than legitimate security personnel. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but their leader remained firm. Legal authority is irrelevant. You pose a threat to galactic stability. That threat must be eliminated. By whose determination? Vorthak asked. By those who understand the true danger of uncontrolled intelligence. Your kind proved too dangerous to live? The humans' kind is proving the same. Marcus felt pieces of the larger picture clicking into place. You're not working for the galactic government at all. You're working for whoever's been manipulating it. The shadow hegemony, Vorthak said quietly. I should have realized. An organization dedicated to maintaining their power by preventing the rise of any species intelligent enough to challenge them. The soldier leader's weapon never wavered. Last warning. Return to your cells. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Vorthak said politely. Then to Marcus, I suggest you take cover. Marcus dove behind the guard station just as Vorthak moved into action. The dragon didn't simply attack, he flowed like liquid destruction, his massive form moving with impossible grace and speed. His wings spread wide, filling the corridor with living shadow. While his claws found gaps in armor that should have been impenetrable, the soldiers' weapons discharged wildly. Energy bolts scorching the walls and ceiling, but none found their target. Vorthak was always somewhere else, moving through their formation like a force of nature rather than a simple creature. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. The soldiers lay unconscious. Vorthak had been precise in his violence, disabling rather than killing. Their advanced armor was cracked and broken, but they would live. Impressive, Marcus said, emerging from cover. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Violence is a tool, Vorthak replied simply. Effective when properly applied, but useless when employed without purpose or restraint. They left the unconscious soldiers behind and made their way toward the station's central hub. Following the emergency evacuation routes that Vorthak had memorized from the security schematics. Along the way, they encountered other escaped prisoners, but Rat,